My friend Shahab was shot by a sniper. I grabbed him. 3 days later, I was shot by a sniper. They rushed me to hospital without telling my mom or dad. They found out that evening, and they were shocked. They visited me at the hospital.
Yusuf, do you remember what it was like before the war?
Pay so much attention to us.
No, I don't remember. It's been a long time.
Quick. We have to take cover as we go. So for the next stretch, we're going to have to run. You can go from building to building here, from family to family, and hear more stories of children that have been deliberately targeted by snipers, like Yusuf's friend, Saber.
Up to now, I haven't been able to visit his grave in the cemetery. As soon as I get near the cemetery, I collapse.
That's Saber's mother, Fatia Ali. He climbed a tree to pick fruit, and a sniper shot him in the chest. His 7-year-old brother, Mohammed, was there too, and was shot in the stomach. He made it home and hid under a blanket, too scared to tell their mother what happened.
When I came and took the blanket off him, I saw he was bleeding. I screamed and screamed and screamed. Then my neighbors came and took him from my arms. Then I was screaming, "Bring me Saber, bring me Saber." I said, "I'm sure Saber is afraid I'll beat him because he took his brother with him." They told me he was in the morgue. I didn't know.
Across Yemen, children are at risk from all sides. Many have been killed in airstrikes by the Saudi-led coalition, which is backed by the UK. But human rights workers here say Houthi snipers are deliberately targeting the young. The Houthi military commander in Taiz said the allegations are unfounded.
Our international correspondent, Orla Gurin, reporting from Taiz.
Now to the Africa Daily podcast, doing what it does, bringing depth to one of our stories. We spoke recently about Nigeria's central bank closing down cryptocurrency accounts. So now Alan Kasuja and the podcast team look deeper into why that is. For the last couple of years, Nigeria has built a reputation as one of the largest cryptocurrency markets in the world. Now central banks.
What's under here? Like they're waiting on the bush. Holy smoke! A dead man. Yes, must be Frank Bryan.
Drop it on. Go to
There's
work.
not Bob Rogers.
Whether it's working in front of a microphone or a soundboard or a phone board scrambling to get the right interviews in at the right time.
What?
Or all the other things that revolve around.
He's filling in.
Hey, whoever killed him, one thing's sure. Someone hid his body here, and that person must have left a scent. How about it, King? After sniffing carefully around the spot, King led the two bodies out of the gully and back onto the trail. Heading away from town.
Maybe it wasn't Chester who killed him after all.
Perhaps not. Alex, I want you to take Brian's body back to town. In the meantime, King and I are going after the person who hid the body in that gully. Louis had traveled most of the night, and by now was many miles from Dawson. As a result, it was 3 days later before the sergeant finally caught up with him. King, swinging the hand of the team, closed in on Louis with a fierce growl. Sergeant Preston shouted to command to halt. Stop the name on the ground! A moment later, the sergeant drew up to his course.
Sergeant Preston, why for you stop me this way?
I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Frank Bryan.
What's that? Sergeant, what you mean?
Never mind playing innocent, Louis. Get your hands up. Keep them up while I search you. Carrying a gun, eh?
Oui, I carry a gun. That does not prove I am a murderer.
King followed your scent from the spot where Bryan's body was found.
Sergeant, I am innocent. I swear I not killed Bryan.
Then if you don't want to hang, you'd better tell me who did.
Oui, I thought. It was Caspar Lubbock who killed Bryan.
Why?
He wanted to get Bryan's share of the gold mine.
And he paid you to get rid of the body, is that it?
Oui, that is so. But I had nothing to do with the murder, I swear it.
Huh? All right, Louie. I'll see what kind of a story Casper has to tell when we get back to Dawson. In the meantime, turn around and hold out your hands. Watching Ging while I snap on these handcuffs. After turning the teams around and hitching them in tandem, the sergeant started back to Dawson, with his prisoner riding the forward sled. That night, they made camp on the banks of a small stream. Soon after turning in, the sergeant was awakened by a sudden growl from King. What's wrong, fella? Wolves? By the light of the still glowing campfire, he saw that the great dog's fur was bristling all along his spine. Suddenly, a twig snapped, and King started forward with a fierce snarl. At that moment, a shot rang out. The great dog fell.
King, it was 19 fishing. Get your hands up.
Casper Lubbock.
Yeah, that's right. So he took your prisoner, Henry? He put the handcuff on me. Yeah, you won't have to wear them no longer. Unlock him, Preston, and don't try no funny stuff when you reach in your pocket for the key.
Under the threat of Casper's leveled gun, the sergeant had no choice but to obey the command. A moment later, Louis's hands were free.
Ah, it is lucky you show up. How come you find us down here in Detroit? Well, it's a long story, Louis. When I found out King was following Frank's scent, I knew he'd find the body for sure. So I started out to warn you not to kill Steve Walker.
Kill Steve Walker?
Sure. Didn't Louis tell you?
Wait, I know,
The plan was to kill Steve and make it look as if Frank had disappeared.
Now, wait.
You would blame the murder on Frank, and I'd be left the sole owner of the gold mine.
You fool, wait before you tell him all this.
That's why not. Preston can't use the information against us. Not after he's dead.
You're going to kill him?
That's right. And I reckon there's no reason to waste any time.
Meanwhile, unnoticed by either Casper or Louis, King was stirring weakly. The bullet had creased his head and stunned him. As the great dog struggled back to consciousness, he remembered just one thing, the fact that his master was in danger. Opening his eyes, he saw Casper Lubbock raise his gun to fire at the sergeant. With a ferocious snarl, King launched himself at the throat. The gun flew from Casper's hand as King's jaws closed on his arm. Before Louis could spring to his aid, the sergeant turned and dealt him a terrific right to the jaw.
Now I pay you back.
Oh, no, you don't. Louis was big and brawny, and he could take twice the punishment of an ordinary man. Again and again, he lunged at the Mountie, swinging his knotted fist with terrific power. But in the end, it was the Mountie's superior skill that told. After a series of punches that left Louis dizzy and glassy-eyed, he finished him off with a smashing right uppercut.
Get him away from me.
All right, King, let him up, boy. I have his gun. On your feet, Lubbock, and don't try any tricks. You'll hang for Brian's murder, and Steve Walker will wind up as the sole owner of that mine. All right, turn around. Hold out your wrists while I snap on these handcuffs. Now then, King, let's have a look at you, fella. Bullet just creased your head and stunned you.
I said that it's a lucky thing for you it didn't kill him.
And it's a lucky thing for you I'm wearing this uniform. Otherwise, before I put on those handcuffs, I'd have given you a worse beating than I gave Louis. Good old King. Once again, you saved my life. Thanks to you, boy. This case is closed. Is electricity your friend? Yes, in most cases. It can be a bad enemy, though, if you direct it through electrical wires which have frayed insulation and can result in costly fires. Remember, the electricity in your home should be your servant, not your boss. But careless wiring will help electricity take over. Check the wires on your electrical appliances, lamp cords, and the other items in your home that have electric wires to make sure that the insulation is in good condition and is capable of preventing short circuits and fires. Defective wiring isn't the only way a fire can start in your home either. Don't permit rubbish or waste paper to accumulate. Clean out your cellar, attic, and closets, and eliminate possible starting places for fires. Almost 1,000 fires daily take place.
People's livelihoods will be affected by the decision the central bank has made. Which is why they're telling the central bank, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's talk about
Service. These special specially recorded radio dramas, a feature of Sergeant Preston of the Yukon Incorporated, are created by George W. Trendle, produced by Trendle Campbell Muir Incorporated, and directed by Fred Flowerday. The part of Sergeant Preston is played by Paul Sutton. Sergeant Preston of the Yukon is brought to you Monday through Friday by the Quaker Oats Company, makers of Quaker Puffed Wheat and Quaker Puffed Rice, the delicious cereals shot from guns. In cooperation with the Mutual Broadcasting System. This is J. Michael wishing you goodbye, good luck, and good health from Quaker Puffed Wheat and Quaker Puffed Rice. So long. This is Mutual, Radio Network for all America.
Shuts down the internet for another night, but the demonstrators remain defiant in the morning and some key workers go on strike.
So we'll be hearing from Bangladesh an update on the trial of those alleged to have been involved in the killing of the prominent writer and blogger Avijit Roy.
Bill Gates has been talking about the challenge of tackling the coronavirus, but he says the real task is combating climate change.
Climate change will cause far more deaths, but it requires innovation across the entire physical economy. If we achieve getting to zero, it'll be the most amazing thing humanity has ever done.
We've got the sport, the business, and also we go to Jordan, where a coronavirus vaccination centre has been set up in the Zatari refugee camp. All that coming up after the latest news.
Hello, this is Danielle Yawowiecka with the BBC News. Demonstrators have again taken to the streets of Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, to protest against the overthrow of the civilian government. The UN's special envoy to Myanmar warned the military authorities there would be severe consequences for any brutal suppression of the campaign of civil disobedience. The BBC's Nick Marsh has more.
We're seeing armoured vehicles, tanks patrolling city centres across the country, rubber bullets being fired, live ammunition being fired into the air to disperse protesters. And you can see now that the risks that the protesters and the civil disobedience movement are taking are increasing day by day. One thing that should be said, though, is that in spite of all these risks, people are still taking to the streets. The civil disobedience movement to resist the military takeover is still happening. What the military leadership in Myanmar is doing is actually to unite and unify the Burmese people in a way which hasn't been seen for quite some time in the country.
The United Nations has said it's alarmed by the escalation of the conflict around the northern Yemeni city of Marib. Houthi rebels launched a fresh offensive in the area a week ago. Paul Adams reports.
For several years, the desert city of Marib has been a haven for civilians displaced by Yemen's long, grinding war. But that could be changing. Mark Lowcock, the UN's Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, says he's very alarmed by the latest military escalation. An assault on Marib by the Houthis, he says, would put 2 million civilians at risk, with hundreds of thousands forced to flee, with what he calls unimaginable humanitarian consequences. It would also represent a humiliating setback for the government.
The British Education Secretary Gavin Williamson has announced a series of new legal measures to protect free speech at universities in England. The proposals are in response to the cancellations of a number of speakers following no platforming campaigns by students. Charlotte Wright has more.
The Education Secretary has
announced plans to place a free speech condition on universities which are registered.
What's that mean?
Gold discovered in the Yukon. A stampede to the Klondike in the wild race for riches. Back to the days of the gold rush.
could also seek compensation if they're dismissed or expelled or demoted for expressing themselves. But the scale of the problem is disputed. The National Union
between 2010 and 2013 went too far and had long-lasting consequences on the man's life. Emily Jabeski, The Canadian Press.
In sports, several final scores in the National Hockey League from Monday night. After being down 5-1, Ottawa stormed back, wound up beating Toronto 6.
The approval gives a boost to global efforts to control the virus.
Taste well of. They're good for you. They're shot from guns. Yes, actually exploded up to 8 times normal size to make them crisp and tender as nuts in November. Tomorrow, sure, treat yourselves swell. Enjoy this breakfast treat. Eat Quaker puffed rice or Quaker puffed wheat. Ezra Sims and his wife Maggie had spent most of their lives panning for gold, from Australia to Nevada and Arizona. And not once had they made a worthwhile strike. Therefore, it was with much misgiving that Maggie, now past 50, listened to Ezra's excited announcement when he rushed into their shabby quarters in Arizona on a very hot day in the fall of '98.
Maggie, pack up your things. We're pulling out of this diggings.
Hold on, veteran. Don't start telling me somebody's made a strike. I'm not interested.
But, Maggie, this is a real gold strike. It'll be bigger than the one made in '49.
I told you before, and I've got...
Out as much of a time.
Taken to the streets in opposition to the government during a year of often violent protests. But these defendants are not the young frontline protesters. They are older and represent the founders of the pro-democracy camp, who've been campaigning for greater representation and the preservation of Hong Kong's unique freedoms long before the introduction of a new national security law.
Johnny Pacheco, the Dominican-born musician considered one of the fathers of salsa music, has died at the age of 85. Pacheco recorded or composed more than 100 songs during his career and was nominated for 9 Grammy Awards. BBC News.
Many thanks indeed for the latest. Hello, this is Newsday from the BBC World Service with Lawrence and Carney, who's standing by to give you an update on the situation in Myanmar. Also, we'll be live in Bangladesh, covering the trial of the alleged killers of prominent writer and blogger Abhijit Roy. Also, coronavirus vaccination centre in a refugee camp in Jordan. How does that work? And you'll be hearing from Bill Gates' thoughts for the future. All that was sport and the business. That's Newsday.
Let's start with Myanmar, where access to the internet was blocked for a second night running by new military rulers. The UK-based monitor NetBlocks reported a near total internet shutdown from 1 a.m. local time on Tuesday, although that now seems to have been restored. The protesters say the shutdowns are so the authorities can carry on arresting them. Thousands are still taking to the streets. The army has used rubber bullets, while UN envoys have been warning of consequences for any violence against the protesters, and there are fears of any imminent crackdown. Gwen Robinson is editor-at-large of the news website Nikkei Asia and is based in Bangkok, and she joins us now. So the internet, Gwen, then is back on again.
Indeed, just as we saw it yesterday, and actually, oddly, there have been announcements issued in advance warning people that, or telling people that it will be suspended from a certain time to a time, which was similar time to what we had last night, a complete blackout. People warned that internet servers have expressed extreme anger about being ordered to block their services. And of course, now there is this draconian new legislation being proposed to force internet servers to hold data and make it accessible to the authorities, and that is also fueling a lot of anger. But what we saw this morning, I think, on the streets, people are back out there. But continuing, I think what is emerging as a pattern is that for some reason the authorities are holding off in Yangon, and we're seeing some shocking violence in secondary towns, for example, Mandalay, where footage was all over the social media yesterday of people being dragged from homes, abused, and also shot with rubber bullets. Similarly, in the north, in Michina, Kachin State. So it seems like the military has more impunity in some of these secondary towns. They're taking it a little more carefully in Yangon, but that could change at any moment, because what we are also seeing is some fairly brutal units of Myanmar's military. Up to recently, it was police, and we even saw the extraordinary spectacle of police turning, but the military is another thing altogether.
Indeed, and we see the presence of these armored vehicles in the main cities, and this is definitely not keeping the protesters away. Now, the military announced stiff penalties for those opposing the coup leaders. What could this possibly mean? How, in terms of penalties, what do they actually mean?
Well, given that even without announcing penalties, we've seen at least, 400, but the figures are going above 400 people just arbitrarily arrested. I think they don't need any justifications or to make clear the penalties, but a lot of people who've been taken are whereabouts unknown. We don't know where some of them are, and in fact it has not even been confirmed that Aung San Suu Kyi herself is in her house in Naypyidaw, but they could be prisons. There are also a lot of detention centres run by the military, and there's absolutely no contact with these people, and obviously no lawyers are able to visit them. So it's all very, it's designed to create an atmosphere of fear, which you can easily see from footage on the streets is not deterring people from pouring out onto the streets.
And all this, Gwen, very briefly, if you could, happening in the midst of the pandemic too.
Well, that's right. Just very briefly, the civil disobedience movement is escalating and I think crippling government and industry, but where it really hurts the junta is in the medical staff who've walked out of state hospitals. I gather it's at least 100 around the country, and there are now grave fears of a third wave of COVID. We wouldn't know. Nobody's testing. We're not getting the figures. Up to before the coup, there were about 800 a day. That's official figures. It could have easily been twice that number or more. And now, who knows? You've seen the protests. They're all jostling together. Very few are wearing masks.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Gwen Robinson, editor-at-large of the news website Nikkei Asia, and she's based in Bangkok.
Which is Newsday, 11 minutes past the hour. 6 years ago, Avijit Roy was walking through the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka, with his wife when they were attacked by men wielding machetes. Avijit was murdered and his wife was seriously injured. And his killing was part of a wave of attacks in that year on liberal or secular writers, academics, and bloggers. Now, today, 6 years on, a verdict is expected in the trial of some of their alleged attackers. Kushi Kabir is a human rights activist in Bangladesh and joins us now. Thanks for your time, Kushi. Give us an idea. You've been watching the trial. What has emerged from not only this trial, but similar trials of the people who attacked and targeted liberals and secular writers? What's emerged from them?
Thank you. Up to now, only one other verdict has been given. The others are still under trial. And as I just heard, the four who have been, there are 6 accused and 2 are absconding. So the other 4 are now in court. They have been brought to the dock. That's the last I heard.
No, sure. And what kind of details have emerged about they are allegations until they're proved, but the sort of organization and mindset that informed this dreadful spate of killings?
Yeah, it was, Avijit was a very influential figure. All of those who have been killed in attacks, like 2015 was the year where the majority number of people were macheted in the most brutal manner. And most of them were bloggers. Some of them were free thinkers or people who were secular, or 1 or 2 even atheists. There have been a couple who were gay. So everybody who was not, they thought, fulfilling what should be the right path have been attacked. Publishers who have published Avijit's books have also been attacked. One luckily managed to survive. The other one was killed, unfortunately. So
yes, and there was a trial, wasn't there, of the gang that attacked Avic's publisher as well.
It's mainly more or less the same group of people.
And who was it revealed was behind
It was
these
called
attacks?
the Ansarullah Bangla team, KPT. Ansarullah Bangla team, who before, when many of them were part of the Hizb ut-Tahrir.
And what has happened in the years since? Obviously, 2015 was an appalling year for it. What has led to, fortunately, a falling away of these attacks? Was it the security services? Did they manage to clamp down on these groups? What happened?
I think that was part of it, because in 2016 there was an attack on one of a high-end restaurant in Gulshan, where a lot of expatriates were having dinner when they were all killed. It was an all-night, operation that went on. That really shocked everybody, and I think it forced the government, because of all the pressure and because some of them were very high-level, expatriates working in Bangladesh. So that really forced them, because immediately after it was the Eid al-Fitr, which is a religious thing, and where there is a congregation of everybody praying together. And in one of the largest congregations, they were attempting to attack, which luckily our forces managed to resist. Some were killed.
Right, so a degree of success. What has it meant for the world of free thinkers, of liberals, bloggers, that kind of thing? Are they still publishing, or has this completely sort of terrified and suppressed that strand of opinion in Bangladesh?
Part is suppressed, very much so, and part of it is self-censorship. A lot of people were frightened and have left the country and have taken asylum abroad. And a lot of people within the country feel that each time they do express their opinion or their right, they are under fear, because they do get a lot of, through social media, a lot of really vicious hate mail. So, and also threats.
And of course, all too obviously, we've seen how those threats can actually be carried out. Many thanks indeed, Khushi Kabir, human rights activist in Bangladesh, reflecting on the background to the trial of the alleged assassins of Avijit Roy, a verdict expected pretty soon.
You're listening to Newsday from the BBC World Service with Lawrence and Carly. Our main headline and top story here on Newsday: small groups of protesters have again defied the military in Myanmar to demonstrate against overthrow of the civilian government. The United Nations has warned of severe consequences if force is used to suppress the campaign of civil disobedience. And we'll be hearing from a doctor who's gone on strike later on in the programme. Let's get sports news now with Alistair.
And 1,000 game minutes after his last Premier League goal, Timo Werner has scored again. Scored one and assisted the other, in fact, in Chelsea's 2-0 win over Newcastle. They go fourth.
No, that's the fish.
Fantastic choice. And plus, there's subsidy. I mean, that's really good.
Subsidy.
Yes, I really want to have.
Groceries and cheese. Here's a tip. It's never sold in bags or bulk.
Tell us something useful about this fish, man.
The clownfish couple shuttle between the sea anemones and the eggs, patiently cleaning up the floating dust. Every bit of space in this precious living environment will be fully used, from the bottom of the sea to the faraway coast. The mouth of the Beilun River in Guangxi is the southwestern starting point of China's continental coastline.
Chinese horseshoe crab is an ancient living fossil. Their size and appearance have evolved over the last 450 million years. As the tide recedes, a female horseshoe crab appears in a tidal creek. A pair of compound eyes on either side of its head gives it a view of the world that human eyes can never get. Adult horseshoe.
You make sure it's 2 sentences long at least, and if possible, try to include some photos as well.
Yeah, what does Amazon say in detail about these fake reviews problem?
Well, Amazon has said that it's aware of the problem, and it said that it removes fake reviews and it takes action against anyone involved in abuse, but we don't have any more details at the moment about what it might have done in the past. In the meantime, the advice is, if you're looking at reviews, is be skeptical. If you're looking at a review, if it seems too good to be true.
Amazon. Who did similar reports in 1994 and 2007.
And in each case, about 80% of the Black population expressed that they viewed anti-Black racism or discrimination within policing, for example, as a problem in Canada, and that's something that they experienced and faced in their day-to-day lives.
Advocates across the country have long been calling for an end to police street checks, and diversity on the bench is another much-needed change. But in Vancouver, Pivot Legal Society's Meenakshi Manoj says there's also a need to address basic inequalities.
Whether that's income or social inequality, people are being subject to policing because of the circumstances of their lives.
There is hope. The report will help move the needle on this problem, creating the kind of atmosphere where change actually takes root. That is Circle News.
With no live performances, although some have done some shows at hotels, like hotels that have a courtyard with balconies, those have been cool to see. Comedians and bands doing shows from the...
Right.
The economic impacts are in the trillions, the loss of learning, the suffering. It's terrible that the poor countries, don't have the same ability to borrow and spend as the rich countries. In fact, Africa's again facing a gigantic debt crisis, and the interruption in their basic health services will actually kill more people than coronavirus will directly. But the pandemic will come to an end because these amazing vaccines were invented in a year, and compared to climate change, that's very, very easy. Sadly, climate change will cause far more deaths, but it requires innovation across the entire physical economy, changing steel plants, cement plants, electricity, transport. So if we achieve getting to zero, it'll be the most amazing thing humanity has ever done.
Well, hold on. I mean, you talk about the technology that's needed, and lots of the technology simply isn't there. I mean, the truth is, we don't have cost-effective, low-carbon solutions for heating our homes, let alone cement, fertilizer, steel, those other industries you mentioned.
Well, yes, the key thing in the book is this green premium, which for some products is very, very high, like aviation fuel or cement. And so to get rid of my carbon footprint, I am buying biofuel, where you take plants and you make aviation fuel, and I pay 3 times as much now for my aviation fuel. And so, for the airline companies, that's not very attractive. We need to get tons of brilliant innovators to think through how to bring it from 300% down to ideally price parity.
So when you say we need to work on it, it's all very well to say it. How do you get people to come up with these kind of breakthroughs, these innovations?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So you have to drive the innovation pipeline. So that starts with the government's basic R&D budget. Then you need a form of venture capital that can take those ideas out of the lab and back them even when they're very high risk. And you need partnerships with big companies, and then you need somebody who's willing to buy the products to create volume.
Fucking simple. There's no
It's your passion.
conspiracy.
You can't really turn it into anything viable.
so many of my friends have given up on the dreams completely and just kind of said, whatever, I can't continue it. I can't continue my passion. I'm not learning anything else, so there's no point in continuing it.
That's why Steve Sanis will keep fighting. As long as there are amps, instruments, and electricity, Rocket Terry Fox will never die.
I'm constantly trying to inspire students to, well, arguing regulations stifled your ability to innovate.
You know, the antitrust trial had some things I disagreed with, but the basic role of government in terms of roads and justice and education and scientific research, you know, I'm the biggest fan of government doing those things in an efficient way. And here with climate, without government policies, there's no way we won't work ourselves into an incredible disaster, particularly for poor people who live near the equator. The malnutrition and death will be 5 times what we have in today's pandemic.
And I think you once sponsored a project to put particles in the atmosphere to reflect back the sun's rays. I mean, is geoengineering a potential solution?
Killed off the dinosaurs.
Geoengineering could delay the negative effects of climate change, but in no way should it be considered a permanent solution. And we understand so little about it that at this stage, it should just be researched, you know, so that no one does it in a naive way. You know, if we got into a real disaster where things were accelerating, could it slow things down and just buy us time? It's worth looking at that.
Bill Gates, billionaire and philanthropist, in conversation with our chief environment correspondent, Justin
Really,
Glover.
that's who that was? He sounds like he's sick and all the time.
Now, Jordan has opened what could be the world's first COVID vaccination center at a refugee camp, according to the United Nations. The Zaatari camp is home to around 80,000 Syrian refugees, and rather than being bussed off to local vaccination facilities taking up a whole day, refugees can now get vaccinated on site. Here to tell us more about this is Lily Carlan. She's the spokesperson for the UNHCR in Jordan. Welcome to the program, Lily. It's an important initiative. It sounds great, but how do you go about vaccinating 80,000 people in a refugee camp?
Good morning. As you say, it's a very exciting day yesterday when the vaccination centre in the camp opened. We had around 55 refugees receiving their vaccine yesterday and another 50 are scheduled for today. The vaccination campaign here in Jordan is actually led by the Jordanian government and the Ministry of Health. And so since the start, refugees have been able to sign up under the national scheme and register online via the website. They're then issued with appointments, and at the moment that's for the elderly and those with chronic health diseases.
And it's really convenient, basically being in the camp itself, not making an effort to go elsewhere. Are they willing?
Because if you take
the numbers
part of the
you
camp,
just
they might
gave us, that's not a very large number. Are people willing to get vaccinated?
So at the moment, out of the 80,000 population in Zaatari, around 2,000 have registered for the vaccine. There are some hesitations around the side effects, and refugees actually just not thinking they're eligible to register and receive the vaccine. But as UNHCR, we have a big communication campaign at the moment to try and change that attitude and show them that the vaccine is the one way that we can combat this virus.
Because living so closely together, they are more vulnerable in getting infected too, aren't they?
Exactly. So Zaatari is a very small camp. There's lots of people living in close confinement. We've been lucky for the time being that numbers of positive COVID cases have remained quite low. They've been under 2,000 over the last 6 months, which is a great achievement, but we don't want to see a spike. So rolling out this vaccination campaign at the moment is the one way that we can prevent that.
Are there many refugees who are in the priority category and who need urgent attention?
Yes, so we have a large number of elderly refugees who live in refugee camps, but also those with chronic health diseases. Around 50% of refugees in Jordan are classified as medically vulnerable, and so that they are now going to be top of the list when it comes to receiving the vaccine.
Well, this is a good move by the Health Ministry in Jordan. It is the first initiative in refugee camps, so a good idea then to roll this out across the world where there are many other refugee camps.
Exactly. I think Jordan is leading the way when it comes to including refugees within the vaccination campaign. And we are slowly seeing other countries follow suit, whether that's in the region, in Lebanon, which just started its vaccination campaign a couple of days ago, or other countries. So it's great to see, and hopefully if everyone is in this together and receiving the vaccine, then we can go some way to stopping it.
Well, Lily, thank you very much for that update. Lily Carlisle, spokesperson for the UNHCR in Jordan, talking to us there about the first vaccination program in a refugee camp. 80,000 Syrian refugees being offered vaccinations in Jordan. This is Newsday. Stay with us.
Distribution of the BBC World Service in the U.S. is supported by Mimecast, used by nearly 40,000 organizations to help.
In just a moment, Sergeant Preston will give you a preview of Friday's adventure. Say, if you can't make up your mind which you like best, Quaker Puffed Wheat or Quaker Puffed Rice, here's what you do. Don't miss out on either kind of these delicious, ready-to-serve cereals. Always keep a supply of both kinds on hand. Eat Quaker Puffed Wheat one time, Quaker Puffed Rice the next. Wheat or rice shot from guns is never sold in bags or bulk. Be sure to look at the big red and blue Quaker package. That's the only way to get the original, crisp, fresh Quaker Puffed Wheat and Quaker Puffed Rice. These radio dramas, a feature of the Challenge of the Yukon Incorporated, are created and produced by George W. Trendle, directed by Fred Flowerday, and supervised by Charles D. Livingston. The part of Sergeant Preston is played by Paul Sutton. They are brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at the same time by Quaker Puffed Wheat and Quaker Puffed Rice, the breakfast cereal shot from guns. Listen Friday when Sergeant Preston and Yukon King meet the challenge of the Yukon in the case of the killer.
On one of my trips to Dawson, I heard whispered talk that led me to believe men were planning an illegal dogfight. I asked Kenny, a boy of 12, to help me verify my hunch. I should never have done that, because Kenny came within a hair's breadth of losing his life in his efforts to aid the law.
Be sure to hear this exciting adventure Friday. For a delicious hot breakfast, eat Quaker Oats. The giant of the cereals is Quaker Oats. Yes, the giant of the cereals is Quaker Oats. Delicious, nutritious, makes you feel ambitious. The giant of the cereals is Quaker Oats. Say, boys and girls, do you want to be a star someday in sports and activities? Then start on good Quaker Oats breakfast tomorrow. Because nourishing oatmeal gives you more growth and endurance than any other whole grain cereal. Still less than 1 penny a serving. Quaker and Mother's Oats are the same. This is J. Michael wishing you goodbye, good luck, and good health from Quaker Puffed Wheat and Quaker Puffed Rice. So long. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
You're listening to Chin Radio AM 1540, the voice of multicultural Toronto, bringing you the latest updates on COVID-19. Stay informed, stay safe, and stay tuned to Chin Radio AM 1540.
Now, as gunshots echo across the wind-swept, snow-covered reaches of the wild Northwest, Quaker Puffed Wheat.
Lawrence and Carney, one of the demonstrators taking to the streets in Myanmar. He should be there now. That interview coming up in just a moment. Also, how to save the Great Barrier Reef off Australia. We hear from the new head of the World Trade Organization, first woman and first African to hold that post. And also, the idea of the Roaring Twenties revisited. 100 years ago, the world recovered, sort of, from World War and world pandemic by going crazy and having a big party and shedding traditional morals Any chance we're going to be doing that in the roaring 2020s? Our correspondent, I've got a thumbs up from the studio. Someone's looking forward to it at least. Our correspondent investigates that in depth. All that coming up, plus the sport with Alistair Ross. That's Newsday.
The first two men accused of leading militia groups in widespread attacks on civilians in the Central African Republic go on trial on Tuesday today at the International Criminal Court. It's being seen as a hugely significant trial, an important one for the country. Elise Kepler is Associate International Justice Director at Human Rights Watch. She's been telling me more about this case. Take a listen.
The anti-Balaka militia was fighting against the Seleka Muslim group, which had launched a coup in the Central African Republic, but very quickly both sides were implicated in committing horrific crimes against civilians. Engai Sona was the self-declared political coordinator of the anti-Balaka, and Yekatom was a commander in the anti-Balaka. So cases would never be oriented towards foot soldiers, but more at the higher levels of the group. Our hope is that these cases are the first among more, both on the anti-Balaka side and the Seleka side. And we do have one transfer of a Seleka suspect to the International Criminal Court just a couple of weeks ago. But this is the first trial that's opening at the International Criminal Court for crimes committed during this conflict.
Now, one of the criticisms is that the International Criminal Court focuses mainly on African countries. Why can't this trial take place within the Central African Republic? Is it because there is a justice void within the country?
It's really important to note that the Central African Republic asked the International Criminal Court to open an investigation in the country. Impunity for serious crimes has been a prevailing issue in the Central African Republic. We believe that impunity, the lack of justice for serious crimes, has fueled further abuses. And in fact, we've seen just in the past month renewed attacks on civilians as a new rebel coalition has formed. The International Criminal Court does step in where national authorities are unable and justice is not being done. Now, in the Central African Republic, we also see that there is now an effort domestically to have some cases, and an unprecedented and important effort called the Special Criminal Court has been established in the country's capital, Bangui, with international judges and prosecutors working alongside domestic practitioners. But that court has specified that it will not take up cases that the International Criminal Court is taking up. And that makes sense because cases involving the highest level suspects are often very sensitive and very challenging to deal with.
Okay, so we're seeing that there will be 1,400 people, or around 1,400 people. They will be participating as victim participants. That's what they're actually called. What does this mean?
One of the most interesting part of what the International Criminal Court is set up to do is to allow victims to be involved as participants in the proceedings and participate beyond acting only as witnesses. This allows them to have lawyers, legal representatives, who present their views and concerns to the court. They can question witnesses, they can give opening statements, they can offer some of their own witnesses, and this is a way to ensure that judicial proceedings, which can seem technical and far removed from the crime scenes and the people affected by the crimes, are brought closer and that the impact of justice is felt more widely.
And this is going to be taking place virtually via live streaming, is that correct?
They have a viewing area set up at a courtroom in Bangui so that people can view the proceedings. It's being broadcast on TV for people who have access to TV, and also a number of radio stations. And that's, of course, how many people get their news and information. And so they will have information about the opening and then summaries of the proceedings as they unfold. And that's more meaningful to the people who have actually been affected by the crimes.
That's Elise Kepler, Associate International Justice Director at Human Rights Watch.
This is Newsday. 22 minutes to the hour. A little earlier in the programme, we were hearing from Myanmar, one analyst telling us that the authorities seem to be holding off cracking down in Yangon, the commercial capital, on the thousands taking to the streets. But elsewhere, in cities like Mandalay and Naypyidaw, there are reports of rubber bullets, arrests, violence. That isn't, however, putting people off. Neither is the regular suspension of the internet. The presence of armed military on the streets is raising fears of an imminent crackdown on those street protests and also the very important strikes in key sectors like the medical sector. One of those who isn't put off and is taking to the streets today is Tinza Shunle Yi, anti-coup activist in Yangon.
Today we are going to protest in the junction, Yangon Junction. We take tents. Someday we take a day off, and someday we get on the streets. And yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Aren't you worried about the danger to you, though, as well?
Yeah, we are worried, all of us. You know, the armed vehicles roaming around in Yangon yesterday. The police force are always there. The water cannons being standby, and all of it. Not just in daytime, but also in nighttime. We have been guarding our own communities from the police because the police are intruding our houses. They are arresting the protest leaders and activists. So we have to be really careful day and night.
Listen, how long can you keep going? All you have is mobile phones, you have pots and pans. The other side have armored cars, they have tanks, they have guns. How can you win?
We never had anything, you know, since long time ago, because even though we were in a democratic transition, that so-called democratic transition, we were never free. There are laws that intimidate our freedom, that restrict our freedom of expression, right to information, all these things. Even under civilian government, we had more than 600 political prisoners, so we were never safe, even when under civilian control. But now in the military agenda, it will get even worse. At the same time, we are witnessing a growing number of dissents, not just activists, you know, a group of organization, but more of us, like almost everyone get on streets. They become activists and protesters, especially the young generation. So it's such a good thing that we have that mass movement joined by thousands of protesters always daily. This is the most powerful thing, and everyone keeps this non-violent. So in the end, non-violent strategy wins. Not just non-violent protest, but also there is a non-violent movement called civil disobedience movement. That's powerful. It's growing every day, joined by different civil servants. So the military agenda could not run their mechanisms, could not rule over the country because many people are leaving their jobs, stopping their works for them. That's what we are hopeful for right now.
How about you? If you weren't demonstrating on the street, what would you be doing? Would you be in an office? Would you be working at home? What are you giving up to go and protest?
For me, things were the same because I've been an activist since a long time ago. So basically, I was doing the similar things, but now the strategy a bit changed.
Aren't your family worried that you're in danger? If you're a well-known activist, surely the police, the army, they're after you. They want you, don't they?
Yeah, they are. Of course, they are feeling worried, especially for my safety, and I can get arrested anytime.
Do you think that the military and the police can arrest enough people to win, or are there too many of you?
Too many of us now. That's something powerful. Even if I was arrested, for example, I won't be worried about the future because there will be many other young people doing the same thing just like I was doing.
Tinza Shun Yi, anti-coup activist in Yangon, speaking to us a couple of hours ago, just before she took to the streets, as you heard there, in the centre of the commercial capital, to make her feelings felt.
Now, the appointment of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as head of the World Trade Organization marks a significant landmark, and we've been speaking about her appointment here on Newsday since yesterday, in fact. Significant because she is the first woman and the first African to get the Director General position. She will bring her experience as former finance minister and deputy central bank governor in her own country, Nigeria, and number 2 at the World Bank. Now, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala spoke to the BBC's Nancy Kachingira just after the announcement was made.
First of all, I am humble and proud to be the first woman and the first African. So I wouldn't minimize that, the fact that the membership have done a historic thing today. But for me, principally, there's so many problems to be solved. And first and foremost is the issue of the pandemic of COVID-19 and looking at how WTO rules and how the WTO can help make access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics more accessible and affordable for poor countries, so that we don't have a phenomenon where rich countries are vaccinating their populations and poor countries have to wait behind. So I'm very proud that COVAX facility, which is supposed to help poor countries get access relatively quickly, and then the WTO can work hand in hand to support the COVAX facility to make this possible. Members can lift export prohibitions. Over 100 members still have export restrictions and prohibitions. So a priority will be how can they lift this so that medical supplies will be more freely available.
Now, there are a raft of issues that you have to deal with as you take leadership. The trade war between the U.S. and China, the WTO has struggled to ease that. There is also a question of trust among members because nations in the global south have often protested that rules favor those in the global north. With all that being said, one of the things you said when you were campaigning was that this trade body needed rules that would bring it into the 21st century. How do you intend to go about reforming the WTO?
Well, Nancy, absolutely. There's an issue of broken trust between members and a lot of work to update the rules of the WTO to 21st century realities. I think not much progress has been made in having success with multilateral negotiations with everybody around the table because of this issue of trust. So how do we go about it? I believe that building trust is not just talking about it. You've got to do it by building through small steps, early wins and successes that can then help create the trust and allow you to do the bigger reforms. So right now we have the issue of the pandemic. And I believe this is one area where the WTO can have success. I think this is one area that can bring members together in a way, working together in trust.
That's the new Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, speaking to the BBC's Nancy Kachingira.
Yep, it's quarter to the hour, which means it's time for the sport now. Alistair Ross.
And Timo Werner has scored a Premier League goal. First time we've been able to say that since November. Exactly 1,000 playing minutes since his last league strike. He scored in a 2-0 win over Newcastle. Meanwhile, manager Thomas Tuchel has confirmed Senegal's Edouard Mendy remains the club's first choice keeper. Now, despite a surprise start in that match for Kepa Arrizabalaga.
We decided to give him one more game because it was simply the possibility to increase his confidence, to give him a little bit of rhythm, to show him that we trust him and that he can show us we can rely on him.
And so Chelsea go above Liverpool, as do West Ham after their 3-0 win over Sheffield United. Liverpool slipping to 6th ahead of Tuesday's Champions League round of 16 tie against RB Leipzig. The first leg of that is taking place in Budapest rather than Leipzig because of coronavirus restrictions on UK visitors to Germany. There have been several rumours on social media about Jurgen Klopp potentially leaving the club, or at least taking a few weeks break. He says that's nonsense.
I've worked in football since 30 years, as a coach since 20 years. I can split things. I can switch off. One thing is and the other thing. And I don't carry things around. If I'm private, I'm private. If I'm in football at a workplace, then I'm here. Of course, we're influenced by things that happen around, but nobody has to worry about me or whatever. I'm full of energy.
Also on Tuesday in Europe, it is the first leg of Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain in Spain. Plus in Africa, Al Ahly play their delayed opening group stage game of the Champions League against Sudan's Al Merrikh. Now to tennis, where Serena Williams faces her toughest test of the Australian Open so far. She takes to court in around an hour's time to face the world number 2 and reigning Wimbledon champion Simona Halep. The winner of that will face Naomi Osaka in the semi-finals. The world number 3 has just cruised past Sei Shu Wei 6-2, 6-2 in just 66 minutes to reach the final 4. But she's expecting a tougher match next, whoever wins.
Halep, I don't really like playing her. She's someone that's really tough, someone that gets the ball back every time. And for me, it's definitely a mental and physical battle. And of course, the same goes for Serena. I feel really intimidated when I see her on the other side of the court. But yeah, I feel you can write your own preview probably better than I can talk it.
And another NBA game has had to be called off because of the league's coronavirus protocols. That is a 25th postponement this season. A member of staff at the San Antonio Spurs has tested positive, and the NBA's close contact rules means the Spurs can't now raise the minimum 8 players needed to face the Detroit Pistons on Tuesday.
Thank you very much indeed, Al Ross. Quick reminder of the headlines. Myanmar is our top story. We've been hearing from there throughout the programme. Protesters once again defying the military to take to the streets and carry out their strikes as well. We spoke to a doctor, and you'll hear from him a little later in the programme, part of the medical strike. Also, the UN is warning of severe consequences if force is used to suppress the campaign of civil disobedience. And also 2 leaders of the anti-Balaka militia in the Central African Republic go on trial at the International Criminal Court, later charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Now, last year we brought you news of a massive survey to better understand one of the world's natural wonders, the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. Well, from today, citizen scientists, which means you and I, can take part in the second phase of this project. The mission, sifting through a massive amount of images and other data collected by divers on the coral reef to help identify its most vulnerable areas. Earlier, I spoke to Christopher Calvet. He's based in Indonesia and a geography teacher in Jakarta Intercultural School. He's taking part with this project with his students. It's the Great Reef Census. Take a listen.
The Great Reef Census is run by the citizens of Great Barrier Reef organization out of Australia, and they have asked for citizen scientists, like you said, all around the world to sort of crowdsource some of the analysis of the reef health of the Great Barrier Reef. And so my students and I are excited to be part of the project and to use their analysis tool online to help contribute to reef health.
Okay, so talk us through it then. If I'm a citizen scientist, how would it work? Would I need any particular skills?
So my understanding, and it's just launched today, but my understanding is it goes from very basic to potentially more complex with training. So the basic side would be literally looking to see if there is reef there or if it's more sand or rubble, and you can use a tool that they have to draw on the actual photograph to sort of determine that. And if enough people draw on that photograph in the same sort of ways, they can determine that the health of the reef is not so good or is good in those locations.
And then how is this helping? I mean, are we going to be working alongside scientists then in sort of getting them to understand how the health of the barrier reef? Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, the size of the reef is so large that the scientists themselves are unable to look at every single image to analyze it, and so that the crowdsourced nature of this allows their I'm assuming it's AI or machine learning software to kind of determine which areas are of highest priority, and then the scientists can tackle those issues.
Okay, got you. So what's been the response from your students? Are they excited? Are they willing to do this? I mean, it sounds easy enough. You don't have to go anywhere.
Correct. Yeah, I think they're really excited. We had a Zoom call with the citizens of the Great Barrier Reef group, and had 50 students show up on their own time. They are a group of my students from my class have already been to Komodo National Park in eastern Indonesia to do this sort of manually. And more of a school style study, but I think this shows them that they can actually contribute to a project of great need, and I think that's what's interesting to them.
And what's also interesting is, like, when you say that you've been to the Komodo Island, you have done that manually in the time of the pandemic. That's impossible. So how challenging is it for you then and your students to do this remotely?
Well, actually, they've made it, the citizens of the Great Barrier Reef have made it so that we can very much contribute remotely. And I think that's the main message, is that anyone, anywhere can contribute to this. Obviously, we can't get out in the waters there because we can't get to Australia. But the fact that phase has already been done and we can help with phase 2 is something we're really excited about.
And what happens then after phase 2 is completed?
My understanding is that the Citizens of Great Barrier Reef group will look at the data that's been collected over the 2-month phase 2 period and then highlight areas of the reef that are of most need to sort of target that for support.
That was geography teacher Christopher Calvert working on that project with his students in the Jakarta Intercultural School.
Right, we are still in the grip of a coronavirus pandemic, but plenty of people are thinking about what happens next. How will our lives have changed? Businesses are very interested in what people are going to be spending any money they've got on. And also, is it possible our societies will be altered forever? To try to find out what's going to happen in the 2020s, plenty of people are looking at an echo of the 1920s, the so-called Roaring Twenties, which came after the First World War, after the Spanish flu pandemic, and led to a lot of people indulging in hedonistic partying and a general shedding of traditional morals and the wearing of short skirts. It was also a period of great instability as well. What can we expect in our own 2020s? Paul Moss takes a look.
The parties thrown by Alex Hoare have always had a reputation for unabashed hedonism. Guests, both women and men, in skimpy, suggestive costumes, entertained by the kind of risque cabaret that might leave a vicar blushing. Alex doesn't know when he'll be able to hold parties again, but he has given some thought to how they might be different once the COVID crisis is finally over.
What I imagine is that, of course, we'll have a kind of propensity to wild, orgiastic release and frenzy and high energy, but we'll also, of course, need that moment of pause to reflect back, regain energy, and then explode that inner stuff that's been milling around and wanting to escape. You know, it's like letting open the floodgates.
It's pretty much 100 years exactly since those floodgates opened in a similar fashion. The soundtrack then provided by that new and exciting form of musical abandon, jazz. They called it the Roaring Twenties, a time of unprecedented license to party after the horrors of World War I and the far greater death toll from the Spanish flu epidemic, the period chronicled by the historian Lucy Moore in her book, Anything Goes.
People's behaviour across the Western world really changed after the First World War. In America, you had jazz clubs. In England, you had dressing up parties. People were transgressing social norms of gender, of race, of class, and that mood of hedonism filtered down into the rest of society.
But do you think you really can draw any parallels with today, other than the fact that, you know, it was the 20s and that it followed a period of widespread death?
In some ways, it's quite similar to now, because the young people after the First World War felt that they'd given the ultimate sacrifice for the older generation. They'd been the ones dying in trenches, and so they were bloody well going to do what they wanted. And now I think the younger generation feels as well that they've made these huge sacrifices. Asked to stay at home. I mean, it's obviously not the same, but it is a sacrifice for an older generation.
And yet that still leaves open the question, why? Why, in the wake of death and tragedy, will people necessarily want to go out to dance and generally party? Of course, there's an element of making up for lost time, a feast of festivity after the famine, and perhaps an urge to indulge in wild, intoxicated revelry in order to forget some of the trauma so recently endured. But the psychotherapist Lucy Beresford sees something more deep-seated at work.
As human beings, we live with this undercurrent of death anxiety about the fact that we're going to die, but we don't know when it's going to happen. So when we have experiences where we have had a brush with mortality, or we've been surrounded by people who've had that, we feel so liberated that we then start to behave with excess. So we could be talking about parties, we could be talking about frenetic sexual activity.
Janie wants to have a party. She lives in rural southern England and will be celebrating her 50th birthday in September. So she hopes that by then, the UK's COVID lockdown will have lifted. 1980s classics like Madonna are what she plans for the party dance floor. But Janie is also making plans for how to keep her guests safe.
I don't want to create a super spreading event. So basically, if you haven't had a vaccine, you're not coming. That's it. But the main thing is, I think I'm just going to do it outside. part of me was thinking that maybe I shouldn't have a party because, yeah, there has been so much death. We've had a family member die ourselves just recently. You know, it doesn't really feel appropriate. But at the same time, I do think COVID is going to have more of a lasting impact than any of us can quite imagine. We need something to look forward to, where everyone can relax and just let their hair down and have a brilliant time.
Thank you to Paul Moss for reminding me that the pubs in Britain probably won't open until May. I've just done a search. That's what the BBC tells me. It's apparently one of the most popular searches. Will the UK's pubs stay shut until May? Yes, appears to be the answer. Paul Moss looking ahead to the roaring 20s. I am coiled. I fully intend to go to the pub every day once we can, but I'm not sure that'll count as hedonistic libertinism. Anyway, I'm looking forward to the 20s, whatever they bring. Paul Moss, many thanks indeed for that report. This is Newsday. Lawrence and Carney join us after the news.
You're listening to News 24.
Buying a new or newer car? Then consider donating your old one to KCRW. You'll be supporting a local public radio station and getting a nice tax write-off to boot. For details, visit KCRW.
Canadian Press. Canadian Press.
Or Quaker puffed wheat. Look for the big red and blue packages with the smiling Quaker man on the front.
Help can make the journey. Kelvin the Money Guy for some advice. He can take the confusion out of investment so that RRSPs, TFSAs, the stock market, mutual funds, and pension plans are working for you. Go to askkelvin.ca because a little advice today can mean a successful tomorrow. That's askkelvin.ca. Askkelvin.ca. We believe in a greater Toronto.
I can see the fucking thing across the road.
Radio 640 Toronto. Of course, company.
I don't understand the logic.
This is Global News. I'm Randy Kilburn. Canada's National Advisory Committee on Immunization is out with a new guidance. Adults from racialized communities disproportionately affected by the pandemic should be prioritized for shots in the second stage of the vaccination campaign. Meantime, the Public Health Agency of Canada says it expects Pfizer and BioNTech to deliver more than 400,000 doses this week and 450,000 each week until April. Latest figures have the provinces reporting just 1,704 new vaccinations for a total of 1,272,470 doses given. The Olymel pork plant in central Alberta closing temporarily because of an outbreak of COVID-19. Health officials say there are hundreds of cases, one death reported earlier. Company earlier said the outbreak at the Red Deer facility started in November. But it wasn't until January 20th there was a significant rise in infections. The United Food and Commercial Workers Union is looking into whether the 1,850 employees qualify for existing government assistance programs. The Quebec coroner's inquest into long-term care COVID-19 deaths is on hold. A lawyer for one of the facilities has requested a postponement or publication ban due to the possibility of criminal charges. Lawyers representing some families of the 47 media organizations opposed to the publication ban request, citing public interest in the right to know what happened. The decision is expected on Tuesday. President Joe Biden facing mounting pressure at the border with Mexico. Thousands of people are waiting to claim asylum. More come every day, falsely believing they will be able to enter the U.S. now that Donald Trump is gone. Biden's made major changes to his predecessor's hardline immigration policies, but he hasn't lifted
40.
Colgate Dental Cream to clean your breath while you clean your teeth and help stop tooth decay.
Funding.
Pandemic cooperate economic recovery. The ministry also says China hopes that the new WTO chief will help advance necessary reforms for the organization and strengthen the authority and effectiveness of the multilateral trading system. Official data shows that China became the main trading partner of the European Union last year, with imports and exports both increasing despite the COVID-19 pandemic. The EU Statistical Service says the bloc's imports from China last year grew by 5.6% to over 383 billion euros. The EU's exports grow by 2.2% to more than 202 billion euros. Eurostat also said the trade in goods with the United States, which had topped the EU's trade partners list until early 2020, saw substantial.
January 6th riot.
This is going to be based off of that 9/11 commission that looked into the September 11th attacks. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi really emphasizing security here. She says that we need to investigate exactly what happened here on January 6th to prevent it from ever happening again.
Pelosi's statement refers to the January 6th siege as a domestic terrorist attack that sought to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. In sports, final
of the pro-democracy camp, who've been campaigning for greater representation and the preservation of Hong Kong's unique freedoms long before the introduction of a new national security law.
BBC News. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Washington is outraged by a rocket attack on a coalition base in Iraqi Kurdistan that's killed a civilian contractor and wounded an American serviceman and several American contractors. He said the US would help the Kurdish authorities track down those responsible for the assault on Erbil airport. A previously unknown pro-Iranian militia group says it carried out the attack. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has angrily criticised Australia for unilaterally cancelling the citizenship of a dual national woman arrested in Turkey on suspicion of being a member of the Islamic State group. The unnamed 26-year-old with both New Zealand and Australian citizenship was detained by the Turkish authorities on Monday. The Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has apologised to a woman who alleged she was raped in Parliament by an unnamed colleague. Brittany Higgins told Australian TV she was sexually assaulted in the office of the Defence Minister in 2019, but had little support from her bosses and had decided against making a formal complaint amid concerns about her career prospects. Mr Morrison said he was shattered by her claims and had called for a review into Parliament's environment and culture. The US National Weather Service is warning that parts of Texas, already in the grip of an unprecedented cold snap, will be hit by another icy storm later today. Peter Bowes has more.
Better known for searing heat waves during the summer, Texas is currently enduring its coldest weather in more than 30 years. The state's power grid failed when it couldn't cope with the demand for electricity. Rolling blackouts have been imposed in some areas to conserve power for hospitals, police and fire stations. There's been chaos on the roads, with drivers unused to the treacherous conditions crashing in the snow. With another storm due to hit the Dallas area, weather forecasters say the cold snap will last for several more days.
That's the latest.
Well, you can. Like, you can do anything you want to do. Right? Sorry, buddy. I mean it in a supportive way. Like, I'm trying to help you find...
campaign in mid-December by offering the Pfizer vaccine to health workers. About 2 million doses of China's CanSino vaccine are currently being bottled in Mexico. Another shipment of the Pfizer vaccine is due to be delivered this week. Russia's Sputnik vaccine and another from China are expected later. The government plans to have more than 15 million people vaccinated by the middle of April.